So welcome everybody to today's topic, the magic of customer research. Before we get started, I want to just give a little brief introduction for those of you that are not part of Soar Marketing Society. Alex, if you could go to the next slide. The community is basically about, sorry, I'm just trying to admit some people here. So Soar Marketing Society is an online community. It takes place in a separate platform through Mighty Network, and it's exclusively for B2B marketers. The whole entire mission with Soar is to help up-level the marketing profession, help marketers think and be more strategic and be seen as a strategic arm of the business versus an order taking or sort of just tactical function. And so we want to help marketers elevate their impact and earn more credibility with the leadership team. So we put together events and small group discussions, really as a way for us to kind of take it off of a platform, and rather than just one-way teachings, let the community decide which topics are important and interesting, and facilitate some conversations there. So if you're not already part of it, here's the link down here that you can join, and feel free to send that to other members and other folks that you think would be appropriate to join who are in the B2B marketing space. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce you to Hannah. She has a background in qualitative research. I'll let her introduce herself and give a little bit more about her qualifications, but I loved her point of view and her perspective, and that she grew up kind of learning research. So she's really coming at it, not just from a marketing standpoint, but really from a research standpoint. So I think she's going to bring a lot of value to the community and to helping us, get smarter and more strategic with how we engage with customers. So with that, Hannah, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here. Great to see so many folks here. I'm going to share my screen and we can dive in. And feel free to interrupt me. I don't think I'll be able to see the chat all the time, but I'll keep an eye on it. But interrupt me, ask questions. I will be pausing throughout to see if folks have questions, but just hop off mic, flag me down. I'm more than happy to answer as we go. And I'm just realizing I'm wearing the same cardigan that I have in this picture. So, all right, let's dive in. I actually want to start with a little bit from you, just so I can get a pulse on where you're at. So if you could just drop in the chat, or if you want to hop on mic, what you do, what your role is, what your relationship is to marketing and research, and if you've ever done research before, I would love to hear from you. It'll just help me get a sense of a pulse on where everyone's at. Open the chat here. Doing marketing. Okay, mostly with IT SaaS companies. Great. And what about have folks done research? Is this marketing consultant for companies, B2B, some marketing research? Great. Marketing manager. I've done lots of research in my role. Usability studies, awesome. Customer journey mapping, conversion mapping, manually annual customer satisfaction surveys. Okay, great. So we've got like a good variety here. Oh, nice. Focus groups, a good stretch, good mix. Perfect. So this will kind of be we'll be sort of zooming out a little bit and pulling out of just kind of the nitty gritty of research here. And I want to ask kind of, how confident are you when it comes to making a case for research? This is something that is less about research, right? And more about like the business case. How comfortable are you with, hey, it's time to do some, we need to talk to customers or survey. What are folks' comfort level with something like this? Nice, very high. Oh, I'm just seeing this from Lawson. My positioning framework includes extensive research. Awesome. Victoria, that's great. Usually a tough sell. Absolutely. Kind of depends on the spectrum, like where you sit in the decision and how close you are to customers in terms of like getting access to them as well. So by the end of this, I'm hoping we can kind of edge more towards this sort of feeling. I love this image of like, it is that confidence of like clarity, right? You know what you're positioning, you know how to frame research, how to talk about research. And so much of that is critical and skipped, right? Like there is such a jump to let's talk to customers, let's do a survey. And these are kind of more the buzzwords. And we kind of skip this like foundational piece. And this is something that I've been doing for about a decade now. I've been in a whole bunch of different industries doing research. I like to call it people research because it's a much bigger umbrella. I studied psychology, trained in copywriting as well. So really aware of not just like the rigor of doing research from the academic world, but also, is it useful? Right? Can we actually act and make decisions from the research? And one of the things that I can tell you from this breadth of experience is that, you know, a little kind of piece that's not as commonly heard or seen is that so much of research is strategy. It's not actually just about the core of like the survey or the interview. That kind of comes at the end, but the tee up is really strategy. And I say this to also say that you don't need to like become a researcher, right? You do need the basics. You do absolutely need the fundamentals. And what we're going to dive in today is really the why and the what, right? These are the pieces that people will jump past and shuffle through because we kind of all just like research is one of those vague words that we think we all know what it means, but everyone kind of has a slightly different definition. So we're gonna kind of drill down and zoom out a little bit. And to start sort of at the top, I want to pose this of like, why is this important anyway? Right. And I'm sure kind of based on your messages in the chat with like a variety of interaction and experience with research, you're not shy to the fact that like so many are enthusiastic about research. I'm very active on Twitter and I see this all the time, right? Like, but customer research is such a buzzword. Everybody's talking about it, has talked about it at some point. It touches something. It's not unfamiliar by any means. But when it comes to actually doing research, as I'm sure many of you know, it kind of is more like this, right? This like, not right now, later, gets easily deprioritized, minimized, like cut back, right? It's the first thing to get compromised on. And the reasons for doing this are pretty far and wide, right? Like feel free to air your grievances in the chat too, but takes too long, it doesn't feel productive, I have more important things to do, we have deliverables and deadlines, and there's a pace to the organization, and research kind of feels like it screeches things to a halt. So a lot of friction there with just the idea of research. And it to a certain extent, this is a very valid point, right? Like really valid question of like, why do research when you could be marketing instead, right? You could be selling instead, which kind of feels like they're pulling in opposite directions. Research has this connotation of being very, very passive and inactive. And the fuller picture though, and I'm sure some of you who've done research, or a number of you from the chat will know that when you really zoom out, it kind of looks more like this. I love this cartoon where research is this like helpful set of wheels that we kind of just jump past. But it really is this like slowing down to pop the wheels on in order to speed up, right? It is the gear and the wheels towards where you want to go. So really kind of, a nice sort of synchronized concept here, that research is not a trade-off, like it's not in the opposite direction of what you already want to do. But in order to make that case, it really requires cementing what is research then? Because for a lot of us, we talk about it more in the sense of like talking to customers, or understanding customers, right? Like these are the big buckets when we think about research, that it is about doing that due diligence, making sure we're interacting and learning and engaging with customers. But these feel pretty negotiable, right? They're not actually tied to anything you're doing. It's like your work is over here, and then talking to customers is like an extra item, or to do. So the actual point of research is far more aligned with what you're already doing, right? It is about making smarter decisions in fewer, faster iterations, whatever those decisions are, and wasting less time on dead ends. So you actually are narrowing the funnel, right? Whether you are putting together ads or copy, messaging, any aspect of the funnel, all of these decisions can move more quickly and operate in a much narrower field of accuracy, a tighter field of accuracy, right? You're minimizing the room for error, which ultimately means you're wasting less time, wasting less money, because you have more clarity. Now, if we just kind of flip this a little bit more to the marketing space, just fun fact, or maybe not so fun fact, the average American sees 10,000 ads a day, right? This is like a pretty gross depiction of it, but it's very real, right? Like we are constantly bombarded. And it becomes a real question here of, well, how do you stand out, right? This like sea of ads, and often a sea of like sameness. How do we stand out? And it's an important question because there's not just one way, right? I mean, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but it is about understanding your people, your audience, what will stand out to them in particular, right? Which is now the impetus to step into their world and their reality. And so with that, we know that relevance wins, regardless, like across marketing, it is relevance. When a prospect sees himself in your message, in your marketing, and it feels like looking in a mirror, when you understand their world so clearly that it kind of connects for them, that's how you stand out. And that's what research can get you. So not just general relevance, but again, customer relevance, right? Specifically understanding your customer. I want to share a couple of examples. This is, that I'm going to show some examples, and just pop in the chat, like, who do you think this site or this image is for? Any guesses? Who is this targeting? Let me open the chat here.
Moms, I would say working moms.
Yeah, I mean, even in the chat, right? Like it's very obvious, very clear. Even this like nap time, it's so kind of on brand. It's very much in the domain. Entrepreneurial moms, absolutely. Like parenthood, entrepreneurship. I mean, all the buzzwords are very clearly there. What about this one? Who is this speaking to? Dog owners, yep. Dog parents, love that. I like very, very clear. I mean, this is like two completely different audiences. There's no mixing and overlapping. It's a very specific language, approach, energy, and the playfulness here, right? The playfulness and the understanding of the type of relationship pet owners will have with their pets, with their dogs, right? This is an example of a page that I did the research for, and it's for a real estate software. And so this is a hyper-specific like pain that is hyper-specific to this unique case of like never lose another lead. this is language that they're using, right? They wanted this first-class client experience to close more deals. I mean, this is not going to be resonant for just anyone. So the specificity in the language and the framing, all of that comes from a deeper understanding of your customer, and a shift from, just as a gentle reminder here, that it is really like not about being the marketer with the tactics and the techniques. It is the thinking like your market as a marketer, right? We can kind of sometimes overlook the thinking like your market and strap on a lot of the techniques and the frameworks in place of that. So really getting better at what does your market actually think? Any questions here before we jump into the next part? Any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good reminder, because I think a lot of companies want to skip to execution without doing any of this work because it takes too long. There's a lot of internal dialogue of people that think they know the customer or believe they are the customer.
Yeah.
So I think this is just a good reminder that it's important to take a step back.
Yeah, and I'm just seeing David's comment here, like the pushback is usually we know the market, but I think it's because new information may challenge groupthink. Absolutely, right? Like this idea of knowing can mean many things. Like, do you have actual words from customers, or are there assumptions, speculations? Is it because you've been in the industry previously? And so that piece of like, well, how has the customer said it? Do we know how the customer has said it? It becomes a really important kind of focus, because yes, do you know the market can become a lot of room for speculation inside of that. Absolutely.
Just to add to that, I think because a lot of initiatives in businesses are driven by leadership, research could actually identify that their idea is a poor one.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore there is a reluctance to get that feedback because it challenges their authority. Certainly
Absolutely.
in the UK, maybe different in the US, but in the UK, I've seen that happen where projects have been pushed forward because it's a personal pet project.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if in your heart of hearts, you would know that if you did research, then it would be, wouldn't be even a starter.
Yeah, absolutely. I work with a number of UK clients, and I've definitely, across the board, I found this too, but there's slightly different elements of resistance, but it is, the positioning becomes so important there, right? That and also the idea that research is not the rule, right? Just because the customer says it doesn't mean that that's what needs to happen, that it becomes like a critical spoke in the whole wheel of the decision. And I think that's an important distinction, that it doesn't have to be sort of like the company versus customer. It is just information to then drive. But yeah, absolutely, that resistance is far and wide. So I want to dive a little bit more into some concrete pieces, because we've kind of talked conceptual a bit more at the business level, but should we actually do customer research? And this is an important question, because the goal is never just to do more research, right? It's really important to know when and where it's actually effective, and effective in the sense of where is it profitable, where is it actionable. So this is always like something you always want to strive for, right? Research is going to be most actionable, most profitable when it's actually tied to an existing objective. So research doesn't have to live in its own momentum. It latches onto something you are already doing, right? Again, back to this. It's not like, hey, stop and do something entirely different. The research is not suggesting in this case, like, let's just completely use another mode of transportation. It's just taking what you're already doing and helping that advance. Now, more specifically, research kind of meets marketing on three different occasions. So these have less to do with the specifics of a project and more at kind of the overall, the outset. So it's not in the level of like web copy or particular part of the funnel, but across marketing, these are sort of three occasions that you want to integrate research into. First is optimization. anytime you're looking to optimize. So you need higher conversions. You perhaps want to diagnose why you have low signups, why sales are inconsistent. You want to increase free to trial or trial to paid conversions, right? Anytime you want to movement and optimize a particular conversion point, research is going to really help you get there. It will not only diagnose what's happening and give you kind of the lay of the land. So it will explain the why behind the numbers, but it'll also help you figure out what the gap is, right? How can we actually change these numbers, get more signups, get more customers? Second is creation. This is when you actually sit down to then write messaging, marketing, ads, web copy, value prop, whatever the case may be. This is going to help you figure out what's the state of awareness, what is the language that your market uses, what do they care about, the content, the quality of the actual piece of copy or messaging or marketing that you're putting together. Should you lead with the problem or the solution? Where are they at mentally? This is going to be another critical point that research will help with. Mind you, this doesn't mean that you need to do 3 separate research kind of ventures, but these are 3 areas that you want to really hone in on. Well, do we know what the customer is saying with respect to each of these areas? Do we know the customer lens? And the last one is validation. I worked at a copywriting agency as head of research there for a while, and we often did validation. So ads, even value prop, having the company version of the value prop, but then also the customer version and in their language, messaging validation as well. This is a, perhaps like slightly different testing. You might get like usability tests as well, more in that arena, but still an important piece that we want to check. And validation in itself is much more of an easier sell towards research, right? Because the whole point is to validate with the market. So it's really the first 2 where you want to minimize guessing. If we want to optimize, let's actually go at this strategically and define the problem. So just as a reminder here, right, the point is not to do more research, but to use it to make smarter decisions. And this is a really key piece when you're looking to get buy-in. So it's not, hey, should we do research? It's, do we know what the customer thinks about this? Do we know what the customer is saying about this? That becomes less of a like yay or nay to research and more of an objective question, like, do we have this data or not? And that's a really good impetus then to push for research. I want to pause here. Any questions, comments? Also use primary research for thought leadership and PR coverage. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Should you hire or do it in-house? This is an important question. When we talk about research, it is a sense of like resources, time, dollars. Can you afford to divide time? Do you hire out and bring someone less biased on? Do you train your team on this and kind of integrate the skills long term? The core here is less of like, what do you have the resources to spend on? And it actually has more to do with where is the business? Like where in the business are you kind of operating? So I pulled this graph. It's from a blog called MediaFix. And it outlines these 3 phases of growth. Now in the blog, they talk more like company growth, but this could be growth at any point, like any kind of objective, venture, anything in marketing can kind of fill these 3 buckets. So discover is like you are figuring out a pattern of success. So you're sort of accruing resources. This could be like finding product market fit, that kind of stage. Whereas duplicating, you've kind of started to identify a pattern that you want to really explode, right? And then in the rethink and modify, this is when the pattern perhaps plateaus, there's some more nuance to the audience. Now you need to really amplify the success, right? And you kind of keep cycling through these phases. And if you walk through these, so in Discover, you actually need a really small gap here between learning and between decisions. So if you think of a company that's in like product market fit stage, they are iterating really fast. I was talking to a lead the other day, and he was they're putting together their MVP, and he was doing some research and needed the gap between like learning and making decisions in the developing team really, really small, right? Like they need to be able to pivot in real time extremely fast to build out this product. And when that gap is really small, you're actually going to benefit from bringing from the team doing the research themselves, because there is an insight in the product. They have more understanding of the needs. You need to make decisions faster and in real time. So this is an instance where if this is kind of early discovering your kind of more general questions, you want to do this kind of work in-house. The moment you start moving into duplicating, so you want to find the pattern so that you can explode it. And this can look like, we have a few customers or perhaps more. We've validated that this exists, but we don't really know what's happening. Who are they? Why are they joining? Why do they care? Why are these folks joining and others aren't? Now you want to find patterns and explode them. And this is a great time for a researcher. Because there's a level of bias that they don't have, and a level of like seeing through the product lens that they don't have. So they can really go in here and identify those patterns from a more objective standpoint without attachment to what they could be, without assumptions, and help you kind of explode them. And the last tier is similar to duplicate. So when you want to figure out another option, you want to rethink, modify, you found maximum success with one arena, but you need to keep optimizing. This is also great for a researcher because they're not coming in with as many of the inputs that you have from previously doing this, right? They're coming at this fresh and looking for gaps and holes and connections that didn't exist before, so that you can refresh and optimize marketing decisions. So this is also a really, really great time to bring in a researcher, because it really does come down to these two kind of pieces: bias and assumptions. And the fact that a researcher doesn't have that, is huge. I mean, we talk about a lot in the research space of like eliminating bias. I'm sure that you've heard many talk about this too, but eliminating your bias it's just not possible. You can manage it and learn how to minimize it. And you can shift your bias towards the customer and being completely curious about them. But there is a level of bias you will just always naturally have. And so being able to take yourself out of that and bringing the researcher in when you want to find patterns or find new patterns or explode them and really understand, like the researcher is great to diagnose, and the in-house is really great to kind of build up from the ground up. Any questions? I'd love to hear where folks are at. Like, have you done, has your company brought researchers on? Have you had training in-house? I'd love a sense of where folks are at with that.
Yes, and feel free to unmute and share your thoughts.
I got some interesting on the bias, but in the B2B software space, usually, you're talking to 10 customers at most, just because of it's just a smaller sample size.
Right.
That's always has always been done internally, and there's a product marketing person, hopefully in most companies, where their role is to understand what the heck the customer needs and wants and get that back to the product management.
Yeah, I'm working exclusively right now. My clients are both B2B right now, and but it is a smaller set for sure. And what I found is the difference is when there is a specific question that they're looking to answer. And either they've dedicated resources to it, but it's been a bit, that's not that person's like full-time job, and they want kind of an outside view. But it does depend. Often the folks that are doing it in-house, they may or may not have had training, or bringing someone in is often like, we need to solve this. Like there's a big kind of transition that they're moving towards. There's some kind of point of clarity that they're missing. But yes, the B2B space is quite different, right? Like a much smaller sample you're working with than direct to customer for sure.
Yeah, and almost all companies have no time to do research. I kind of laughed when I saw your cartoon. But the way that I get around that to some degree is whether you have the time or not, talk to your sales team first.
Absolutely.
So find out what they think, and find out what they think caused the buyer to buy. And then you go and talk to the customer and you find, if there's some discrepancies, there's some discussions that need to occur internally about reality.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely an initial part of my process, is to figure out who's customer facing, who can we learn from, and pull those insights together is absolutely a critical piece. But yes, very few will have time for research, but many will have time to minimize the error in their decisions, especially when dollars are behind this. So that framing becomes really, really important of like, do we have time for research? Probably not, but do we have time to rework and go through more iterations and be kind of shooting in the dark? It becomes a different question. So when it's about the holes of like, do we know, are we guessing? Like, is this based on speculation, or do we know what the customer is saying? And especially when we can drill down into like, what is the decision we want to make? Because research is something, you'll have to do eventually. Either you talk to the customer, or the customer will tell you, yes, I want to buy, or no, I don't. And so you either get research that way, or you get research more directly where you're kind of being proactive. So it is, I'm very much an advocate for, let's not talk about research. Let's talk about what decisions you're making and with how much input. And this kind of opens up into a piece around like confidence and smarter decisions, because a lot of folks internally will feel very confident about their decisions, and the confidence doesn't necessarily mean they are more equipped and have more evidence to make an informed decision. So really getting clear on like, do we know this, or are we speculating? How many dollars are behind this? How much time? How many people are putting resources towards this? Because that's going to help kind of contextualize the value of research, as opposed to just like the research flag kind of lonely on its own. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to add to that. I think that customer success teams are, to add to what you mentioned about talking to sales, customer success teams are a great resource for marketing, because they come in with an agenda to be basically the voice of the client, right?
Yeah.
And something that I find curious and interesting is, you mentioned that a lot of organizations are sort of averse to research, and I think a big problem, or a big reason behind that, is that they're not viewing research as an investment in the future of their business, and perhaps it's because it's framed as research and not, and not sort of like market intelligence, if you framed it differently. But something that I find curious is that a lot of business leaders who champion, the data-driven decision sort of, mentality, are often the same ones who are averse to research. We know who our customers are, we've been dealing with them for so many years. True, but what about new generations of consumers, right, who have very different needs and tendencies and that sort of thing? So I think it's important to do this. I mean, to do the research and update it every year, because it's constantly changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point with like talking to customer success, client success, like anyone customer client facing, really, really helpful. And also there is a level of, you kind of reach a point at which, you know, when it comes to the core of like, what's driving someone, what is the root, why do they buy, not necessarily just why they say they buy, but what were the actions. There are so many contradictions in like we say one thing and we do another, that there is, as much as you can get absolute value from talking to sales, talking to customer client success, there is value to also take that next venture and really kind of dive deep. I often find that what I learned from customer and client success is, or sales, is like, it'll be kind of that initial, they'll start to hint at things that when I talk to a few, I can stitch together and see, oh, okay, I think there's a bigger pattern here, right? Because often they're working with like just a few accounts at a time. And so you start to see a bigger lens that the later interviews that I do with the customers directly will really drill down into what was happening, what was driving the decision. So it is an absolute like next step that's great to do. And there's also value in taking that deeper dive for sure. Cool. Any other comments, thoughts, musings about research?
Musings, yes. I mean, I'll add one comment. I see, you know, there's kind of two sides of the marketing lens to research, because I work with clients as well to do customer research, but it's typically on the other end. Once they've become a customer, there's some frustration within the operations team or within the sales team, and it becomes more about, you know, are we delivering the value that we promise to customers? So in marketing and sales, we're saying one thing, and then there's another piece of research that goes back, you know, to your point, to validate, are we actually aligned with the value that we're out there saying that we're doing? And often I have found that the sales team typically goes really narrow. And, you know, when you say like, what's the value of this solution to your customers, they'll give you something that's very narrow, and kind of miss the whole big picture of what's going on in the customer's world. So then when I talk to customers, they're like, yeah, I use that thing because it helps me be more efficient, and without it, you know, I can't do my job. Whereas the sales team will, you know, focus on some feature of the product and try to pitch the feature instead of, you know, the ultimate value, which is the only reason they're buying is to be more efficient in their job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you're looking for a pattern, when you're looking to diagnose what's happening and you want to optimize or validate, the value of talking to all of these groups becomes really important, right? Because they're each kind of owning a separate piece of that customer journey or customer perspective, and you can kind of stitch them all together and help fill in each of those gaps. Absolutely. All right. I want to talk through four more concrete pieces. This is kind of a deeper dive into specifics and the actual kind of research component itself. So, you know, once you've got that buy-in, what do you actually do? And we'll talk through four pieces here, more on the how-to. The first, which so many of us skip, but this is such an important piece, is like, what is the need? Because we can either take the spectrum of like, do we even need research or not? Should we be doing it? But then there's the other side of like, we just do it also blindly, right? Like, okay, it's just part of our process, which isn't any better necessarily. Having importance, like having clarity on the need is going to get you closer to the insight that you're looking for, right? Like you really need to know what is it that you want to learn. So not just the business case, but what are you actually looking to find out? So two reasons. One, how you phrase this question, it often is a research question. It's going to determine the utility of everything else, right? Like this is a non-negotiable truth. If you don't get the question right, you have no hope at the answer. And so the closer your question is to what you want to know, the closer your answer is going to be to. Now, this seems obvious, but when we actually start to spell it out with research, this is something that we kind of skim past. We'll ask a much more kind of surface question like, okay, we need to know why customers buy, or we need to know why folks sign up. And this leaves a lot of room here because this is not just like one isolated moment. It actually spells out into a few things. So why do customers buy could mean, what did our newest customers look for in a solution like ours, right? Like what were their solution criteria? What did they kind of check off the list? I want to make sure it has X, Y, and Z. It could also mean what triggered them to choose a solution like ours in the first place. So now we're thinking more about like your solution with your competitors and what was happening that they decided on your solution. But it could also mean like what was the pain, the problem that drove them to look for a solution like yours in the first place, right? So the why do customers buy is a huge, huge piece. And unless you have the clarity, your questions that you then take to ask the customer are going to be more diluted. So you really want to drill down. This is something that I do with every single client I work with. And in the beginning, that initial conversation, you know, everybody speaks in sort of vague language because the goal is, well, let's just talk to them. We just want to learn. And the moment I kind of pull them back and say, okay, let's get really specific, things start to change. And then we learn, oh, well, actually, we do need to inform this bit of messaging, or we also want to understand the value, and things start to unpack. So you want to do that unpacking and getting the clarity of what you want to learn before you do the research. Let it drive the research, because these are going to directly inform now what you ask the customer. And I can drill down really specifically into competitors here, whereas I might not do that if this is the perspective I'm thinking, right? So we want to be really, really specific, and that's going to help us get better quality, more accurate insight. Second is the methods come second, right? We kind of skip that. Research just means like, let's talk to customers, let's survey customers or leads or whoever our audience is. But Erica Hall says this really well, like you won't even know if doing interviews is right until after you've written your research question. This is like, it has become so synonymous of customer research and customer interviews or surveys that we skip that first step and we just start with the methods. And we want to do kind of the opposite, because we don't want to have the conversation of like, okay, we're going to run a survey, what should we ask? The survey needs to be a result, like research is a response to a marketing question. It is not its own endeavor, right? This is how research becomes useful, because if research is kind of in a silo, you'll talk to all the customers, you'll get all the information, and then where does it live? Like, what does it drive? What does it inform? So not we're going to run a survey, what should we ask? Instead, we need to understand what influences our current customers. In this case, I picked like a project management platform. So what influences them to find and choose project management platforms? So we're going to interview those who've purchased in the past 6 months, right? Like research is we're going to do this. Here's the problem. We need to understand this. We need to have this clarity. And then we do this next thing. Not leading with the method, because then we skip all of the other clarity that we need. Just as an aside here, I'll throw this in, that key difference: surveys go wide, interviews go deep. We often, and if you can only run a survey, sure, do as you can with it. But I've seen a lot of folks ask this, like prep interview questions, and then they'll throw them into a survey. Surveys are for stated preferences. So people will tell you, oh yeah, I'm a super healthy eater, and they'll check that off. And then in reality, maybe their eating is a lot more, I'll go with a word like dynamic, than just healthy eating, right? So interviews are going to let you get to the reality, and surveys are going to get, well, more in the multiple choice, that you validate ideas from the interview and then you check them across a wider sample. So if you can choose, if you really want to get into the whys and the how comes and the driving behavior, you want to do interviews, and then validation with surveys. Another quick way is the insight you need one question away? If it is, then do a survey. And that, if you're asking a question like, well, why did you buy? Yes, that's one question away, but it's a huge question, right? It needs to be an immediate, a small kind of more focused question. Number 3 is to analyze your findings. When the focus is talking to customers, we kind of skip this part, but it is so important. And it is the difference between having data and having useful data, right? That you can actually make decisions on. I worked with a client that had hesitant buyers, and they just didn't have a sense as to why. Like, they would go through the sales cycle, have all these conversations, and it was just really, really slow and hard to get them to say yes on the other side of that. So we did some interviews, and we did some surveys, and we kind of went really deep into like what's happening. And very quickly it became clear that leads just kept saying that the pricing was complicated and scary. Like, it was just so confusing for them. And when I looked and kind of pulled out quotes, it was very apparent, right? The pricing is complicated because you have this double price. The pricing is really unclear and complicated. It's quite scary for a startup. The pricing is worrisome for a startup. Will it change next month? We can't tell. Like, these are quotes, actual customer quotes, and they almost sound like they're from the same person, but they're from completely different people. I mean, they had this question that they'd been kind of mulling over for so long, and it became so apparent so quickly that they just need to simplify their pricing and their messaging around pricing. This is such a specific solution that the chances of them identifying this as a solution without talking to customers are pretty slim, right? Like, the customer would have to identify this. Like, this is not a go-to that the marketing team was like, okay, let's look at this. They thought it was something else in their kind of sales journey, but this made it really, really easy. Instantly, they knew the immediate solution. Another client that I had, they were highlighting what turned out to be like all the wrong features. So they wanted to optimize their onboarding. They were wondering why people were so enthusiastic signing up and then kind of falling off a little bit after. They weren't super engaging. And we found out that they were highlighting features that like people just didn't really care about. That's not why they signed up. And when we looked at the quotes, it's a pain having one-off charges for these tools. Multiple platforms can get kind of nauseating. It's frustrating with so many platforms. This redundancy of like multiple platforms, where the client that I had one platform, and the value that they brought was that everything was centralized in that platform. And so it became really clear that this wasn't a throwaway feature. This wasn't just like, oh, everyone has that, this doesn't really stand out. This is why people came, and they were kind of imposing their own bias there of minimizing when they were looking at the market. And the customers just kind of brought them back to reality of, no, this is what we care about. Talk to me about this. So really kind of a level of specificity that you get by talking to customers that you can't get from just kind of speculation or without that data. The last key I'll mention here is to get interview training. The reason here is that, and this means in any respect, the reason here is because people lie, right? Like, we like to please. We like to exaggerate. We have what we think about ourselves versus what we tell you what the reality is. There's so many contradictions and conflict between why people say they buy, why they actually buy, how they acted, and what their decisions were, and the nuance there. If you don't have training, you won't get to that level. You will kind of just get to the buckets that everyone hears, which is, oh, the price was great, or it was convenient, it saved me time, it saved me money. I mean, those are very general buckets, right? You need to be able to go down and really understand what's driving people. And when you don't do that, you end up actually becoming really confident about the wrong thing, which is very dangerous, right? Like, it's very easy to do this wrong because you think, oh, I just talked to the customer, I asked them why they buy, and they told me. And then now you have voice of customer data that is not necessarily accurate. A lot of times customers didn't process exactly why they buy. I mean, sometimes, but they don't always process that, the questions that you're asking around their decisions and why they like this product over the other. They're just kind of in their experience. So you need to know how to tease this out. And it is a very like experiential skill. It can look very much like talking, but the best interviewers, you don't even notice them. If you remember to an interview, I mean, I'm thinking of a number of like Oprah interviews, or even Letterman interviews, where you are so engrossed in what the person they're interviewing is saying. And the reason is because the interviewer just kind of keeps feeding them the right questions, right? It is such a craft. And I love this space. This is something that I've been doing for a really long time. But it is such a nuanced dance of getting someone to open up. I mean, mind you, these are strangers that you're often talking to, right? They don't really know. There's a lot of kind of social dynamics. How do you get them to get to the core of what's driving them in a very short span of time? All of that to say, customer research is not a veto power, right? Like, you are still the decision maker. It is not taking away your decision. It's just giving you more evidence to make a smarter, stronger decision that is ultimately going to, ideally lead to more conversions. So I'll stop here. I have one last mention that Stacey called out at the beginning. I do have a training coming up, and feel free to, actually, I'll drop this in the chat, but if you are interested in getting on the wait list, it's going to be a really kind of deep dive crash course, because my whole thing is that like research is so learnable. You don't need to be a researcher to do this, but there are key pieces that when you are interacting with customers, you want to make sure you are learning correctly and effectively, so that you're not wasting your time going down the wrong kind of path, and you are able to make the case, when it comes to the question around research. So I'll drop that in the chat if that's something that you're interested in. But otherwise, I'm very active on Twitter. I would love to hear from you. Feel free to message and reach out. I would love to connect with you on there. Let me drop this here. Any questions?
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. That was awesome. Yeah, I would love to just open it up for questions. And if nobody has one, I do have one. So I think it's really important, the interview training. This is when I see the advice that every marketer should go talk to customers. I think, there is another sort of underlying thing that people don't necessarily talk about, especially in the B2B space, which is that sales owns the relationship typically with the customer. Marketers do not. And, how marketers need to basically earn the right and show that they're credible to be put in front of those customers, so that sales will broker that introduction and set it up for them. So I think, having confidence in how to conduct the interviews and knowing how you're structuring the research, what information you're trying to get, makes everybody feel confident, including the sales team, so that they will put you in front of those customers. So I love that.
Absolutely. It's such a positioning thing. Hey, like, research is like, everyone wants the insights. Nobody really wants to do the actual research. So it's really about, how can you get people on board and align with like selling research to them, essentially.
Yes. So one question I have is if you have any, tips or advice on what to do after you've done the research. So what's like the best way to share the information? Because I found that usually it's like a small group of people that are involved in the research, and not everybody has been involved in the project the whole way. So they need to be brought in and not question your findings.
Yeah, it's a really important piece. I mean, how you share the findings is how they have a shelf life, right? Like, if they just kind of live in a small space on your Google Drive, they're just not going to get found. And I would highly encourage, one, distill what you've learned, two, throw them in slides and actually present this, actually share this actively, not here's a document, but let's walk through them. The value of doing research then is that you can actually take what you've learned, share it with the team, and then the whole team kind of improves and increases and deepens their understanding. So it's really going to be about, can you actually share this? Create a meeting. I would highly encourage that. Put some slides together, make it digestible, because if people have to comb through what you went through with all of the interviews, all the transcripts, etc., that's going to be really, a challenge, and it'll just kind of get lost. So if you're doing the research, take that extra time to sort of distill it, have that one pager that you can share, bring in a meeting, and make sure that folks are actually hearing and engaging with the data directly. I'm just seeing this message here. Let me drop it in. Yeah, it looks like that link is broken, but I'm going to drop in this one. This should work.
Any other questions from anybody? Thoughts, questions? Takeaways?
This was a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
It's not a topic we talk about so much, so I love, peeling it back the onion a little bit and digging in, because it's kind of, what you said, a buzzword, and everybody's just go do customer research, just go talk to your customers.
Yeah, it's an interesting space that I'm in now, whereas before I was doing research for copywriting, and so the clients would be coming for copywriting, whereas now I do research that is the deliverable. So I have the other side of folks that are like gung-ho about research too, but internally they still have to sell it, and making sure it has that lifespan is really huge. So a lot of the legwork of doing the research is, how do I put this together? Like, what is meaningful for you? So even kind of interviewing or understanding the team, like who's going to use it, how are they going to use it, what decisions they want to make, that's going to help you. Like, are they going to improve their sales deck? That's going to help you figure out how to distill. Are they looking for like this particular placeholders on their sales deck? The client that I'm with now, they have like specific things that they want to understand. Well, knowing that's going to help me shape the data very differently. So the more clarity you have up front in that planning phase, the sharper and more effective your insights are going to be, for sure.
So Hannah, you're saying you have to do research before you do your research?
Yeah, absolutely. You caught me.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you everybody
Awesome.
for joining today. And I will be sure to send this link out, as well as Hannah's in the community, so you can connect with her there and on LinkedIn and Twitter, as she mentioned. So
awesome. Thank you so much, guys.
Everybody have a great day. And thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.